Bible students, have you ever noticed that the Bible requires that in a time which would appear to be something like our time that we're living in, Jesus Christ will return to the earth? You see, in Acts chapter 1, verse 11, as you see it on your screen, the angels that were present at Jesus' ascension said, "Men of Galilee, why do you stand gazing up into heaven? This same Jesus who was taken from you up into heaven will so come in like manner as you've seen him go into heaven." So there we have the evidence that Jesus must return. And if he must return as he went, that he must return bodily, physically. Now, what we are trying to do is show you how this return fits so nicely and precisely into the prophecies relating to Russia and Israel at the present time. First of all, we need to see where this occurred. So the prophecy was given at the time that Jesus was at the Mount of Olives. So future events at Mount Olivet? Yes, because in the next verse in Acts chapter 1, it says, "Then they returned to Jerusalem from the mount called Olivet, which is near Jerusalem, a Sabbath day's journey." Now, this is a very helpful link because many of us, Bible students, may have been to Israel, have a knowledge of what's on Mount Olive, of the Mount of Olives. And this picture here will illustrate that this is kind of unique to a mountain to see so many graves on this mountain. And there's a reason for that. And that reason is not something we can explore much in this video, but we hope to in future videos. That this is because of the hope of the resurrection. So people knew that there was going to be something associated with resurrection occurring on that mount. But let's go on. We want to show you how this is linked to the Russian-led invasion of Israel. So you need to go to a parallel passage or a parallel prophet in prophecy compared to Ezekiel 38 and 39, and that is in the prophet Zechariah. So in chapter 14, verse 1, it says, "Behold, the day of the Lord is coming, and your spoil will be divided in your midst." Now, we've talked about this in a former video, that this is talking about the day of God's visitation of Israel and the Russian-led invasion of Israel that occurs there. So it says in verse 2, "I will gather all nations to battle against Jerusalem. The city shall be taken, the houses rifled, the women ravished. Half of the city shall go into captivity, but the remnant of the people shall not be cut off from the city." So this far into the prophecy, God's going to gather all nations to battle against Jerusalem. Now, all in the scriptures is usually qualified. In other words, it's not every nation, all the nations of Africa, all the nations are on the islands around the world. No, it's the nations that are mentioned in the prophecy. So we know what they were. We talked about them a little in an earlier video on Ezekiel 38. God's gathering those nations to battle against Jerusalem. So yes, the city shall be taken. This has not happened yet. The houses will be looted, and half of the city will go into captivity. Now, this is a very interesting development that we see now in what Russia is doing in the Ukraine, taking captives, taking the people that God, it's not unusual for people to be taken captives, but to take them to some remote place and resettle them is unique. It's uniquely related to what the kings of Assyria did, but it's not something that we would see normally. They would be in a prison somewhere. So we want to watch that, and that will come up again in our studies on Bible prophecy and what's happening in Jerusalem. But the remnant of the people will not be cut off from the city. In other words, not everyone will be taken captive. There will still be some left. So you see the city of Jerusalem there, and that's what you can see from the Mount of Olives. But while the Russians are decimating Israel, there's something happens. Very next verse in Zechariah 14. Then the Lord will go forth and fight against those nations as he fought in the day of battle. Now, I want to draw your attention to another thing about this battle as it's progressed into Israel, and now as it's being talked about as something that will be on the valley of, or on the Mount of Olives, in the valley between the Mount of Olives and Jerusalem. So that's where we expect nations will be congregated. But look at this picture. Now, some of you again will know this, because if you visited Israel and you've looked at what's on the Mount of Olives, as we've already said it in an earlier video, you would see that the Church of Mary Magdalene is at the base of the Mount of Olives, and it's Russian. It belongs to the Russian Orthodox Church. Well, look at this one. Here's this steeple at the very top of the Mount of Olives, and it is called the Cathedral of the Holy Trinity. And likewise, it belongs to the Russian Orthodox Church. So here, this prophecy in Ezekiel 38, talking about Russia's invasion of Israel, and Zechariah telling us how the Lord's going to intervene at a critical time. And here we have these markers of the Mount of Olives showing that there's a Russian interest there. Would this be part of the spoil that Russia comes to take and claims that it's theirs? That would seem quite likely. But the next verse, Zechariah 14, verse 4, and in that day his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives, which faces Jerusalem on the east, and the Mount of Olives shall be split in two from east to west, making a very large valley, half of the mountain moving toward the north and half of it toward the south. So all these churches and all these buildings around the Mount of Olives will be greatly disrupted and probably torn to pieces by an earthquake, which will go right through the middle of the Mount of Olives. But you do not want to miss the idea that it says, in that day, his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives. And the question is, whose feet will stand on the Mount of Olives? Now, for Bible students, you have a great advantage, because if you've been reading the Bible and studying the Bible, you would know this psalm in the Old Testament. Psalm 22, verse 16, that says, for dogs have surrounded me, the congregation of the wicked has enclosed me, they pierced my hands and my feet. Well, whose feet and hands were pierced? Pierced by the iron nails of Roman crucifixion. Well, it was Jesus. So you have this, you see, as a unique advantage if you were a Bible student, to be able to recall that from the scriptures, so that you can use the principle of Bible interpretation, comparing spiritual with spiritual. That is, looking at some part of the Bible and seeing its interpretation provided by other places in the Bible. So if you go to Luke 24 and you follow this idea of his feet in verse 39 and 40, this is what it says. He says to his disciples after he had risen from the dead and was now made immortal, behold, my hands and my feet, that it is I, myself. Handle me and see, for a spirit does not have flesh and bones, as you see I have. And when he had said this, he showed them his hands and his feet. But how would showing his hands and his feet prove anything? Everybody would normally have hands and feet, but Jesus' feet are marked. They have the symbol of crucifixion right in them. There is only one set of feet that could ever illustrate that. And to be alive after being dead would illustrate how Jesus had miraculously been raised from the dead. And now, being a spirit creature or being an immortal, he could identify clearly that his feet are the markers that they should be thinking of. Well, I think we need to just review this. Jesus ascended to heaven from the Mount of Olives. So the prophecy concerning his return was made from the Mount of Olives. The angels promised he would return bodily there to the Mount of Olives. During the Russian invasion of Jerusalem, there is a great earthquake marking divine intervention. Where? The Mount of Olives. Bible students will know by the use of the phrase his feet that Jesus is being identified. Jesus returned at this time in history, maybe just shortly from now, where we are in history. But with his power, his skill, and immortality will change the whole world, completely change the picture of what we're looking at in this world. Bible students, keep your Bible open, keep studying it. And Lord willing, our next video will be placed on further developing this idea of Jesus' return to the earth, to the Mount of Olives. Until then, may God bless your study of his word.